Morning, boys and girls. Good morning. Happy Thursday, I guess. I'm going to read another section of Where the Red Fern Grows, and I just wanted to touch base with everybody. Please feel free to dojo me if you have questions or concerns. If you just want to talk, I'm here and love to answer your dojo messages. I'm just about to get ready to go here, but I wanted to show you Petey Pie. He is my live audience, and he is sitting on the couch watching me. So there he is. He is an active audience today, and he will be listening and applauding when I'm done reading. Okay. I've had a couple questions about what can you do today. If you want to do some reading today, that'd be great. If you want to practice those multiplication facts, you've got your multiplication flashcards with you. I also sent a few of the Dirty 30 sheets with you guys. You can certainly practice on those. If you want to take a look at some of the small reader books that you got sent home, feel free to dig around in the things that you brought home with you. Otherwise, go ahead and dojo me with questions too, and I can maybe help individual people. Okay, so got my reading glasses today, and I'm ready to go. I wish you guys were all here so I could say, what's going on in our story today, guys? And you could tell me. But I believe where I left off yesterday, they were waiting for Dan. And Billy had said, just one more time, please. Just bawl one more time for me. And that's where we'll pick up. I waited for my plea to be answered. With its loud roar, the north wind seemed to be laughing at us. All around, tall stalks of cane was weaving and dancing to the rattling rhythm of their knife-edged blades. My father tried to talk above the wind, but his words was lost in the storm. Just before another blast clears a foghorn on a stormy sea, all of a sudden old Dan's voice rang loud and clear. It seemed louder than the roar of the wind or the skeleton-like rustling of the tall, swaying canes. I jumped to my feet, and my heart did a complete flip-flop. The knot in my throat felt as big as an apple, and I tried to whoop it. It was no use. Little Ann bawled and tugged on my rope. There was no mistaking the direction, and we knew that little Ann had been right all along. Straight as an arrow, she had led us right to him. Old Dan was treed down in a deep gully, and I slid off the bank and ran to him. His back was covered with a layer of frozen sleet, and his frost-covered whiskers stood out straight as porcupine quills. I worked the wedge of the ice from between his toes, and I scraped the sleet from his body with my hands. Little Ann came over and tried to wash his face, but he didn't like it, and jerking loose from me, he ran over to the tree and reared up on it and started a-bawling. Hearing shouting from the bank above, I looked up, and I could dimly see my pa and the judge through the driving sleet, but at first I thought they was shouting to me, and then peering closer, I could see that they had their backs to me. Catching hold of some long stalks of cane that was hanging down from the steep bank, I pulled myself up. Papa shouted in my ear, "Something's happened to your grandpa." Turning to the judge, he said, "He's behind you, sir. When was the last time you saw him?" "I don't know for sure," the judge said. "I guess it was back there and we heard the hound bawl." "Didn't you hear nothing, Papa?" I asked. "Hear anything?" the judge exclaimed. "How could I hear anything in all that noise? I thought he was behind me the whole time and didn't miss him till we got here." I couldn't hold back the tears. My grandpa was lost and wandering in that white jungle of cane. Screaming for him, I started back. Papa caught me and shouted, "Don't do that, Billy." I tried to tear away from him, but his grip was firm on my arm. "Shoot the gun," the judge said. Papa shot time after time, but it was useless. We ain't got no answer. Little Ann came up out of the washout, and she stood and stared at me. Turning, she disappeared quickly in the thick cane, and minutes later, we heard her. There was a long, mournful cry. The only times I'd ever heard my little dog bawl like that was when she was baying at a bright Ozark moon, and when someone played a French harp or a fiddle close to her ear. She didn't stop until we reached her. Grandpa lay as he had fallen, face down in the ice of sleet. His right foot was wedged in the fork of a broken box elder limb. When the ankle had twisted, the searing pain must have made him unconscious. Papa worked Grandpa's foot free and turned him over, and I sat down and placed his head in my lap. While Papa and the judge massaged his arms and legs, I wiped the frozen sleep from his eyes and his face. Burying my face in the iron-gray hair, I tried and begged God not to let Grandfather let him die. "I think he's gone," the judge said. "I don't think so," Papa said. "He took a bad fall when that limb tripped him, and he ain't been laying here long enough to be frozen. I think he might just be unconscious." Papa lifted him to a sitting position and told the judge to start slapping his face. Finally, Grandpa mowed and kind of moved his head. "He's coming around," Papa said. I asked Papa if we could get him back into that gully where old Dan was. I'd noticed there was very little wind there, and we could build a fire. "That's a good place," Pa said. "We'll build a good fire, and one of us can go for help." Papa and the judge made a seat by catching each other's wrists, and they eased Grandpa between them. By the time we reached the washout, Grandpa was fully conscious again and was mumbling and grumbling. He couldn't see why I had to carry him like no baby. After easing him over to the bank and down into the gully, we built a fire. Papa took his knife and cut the boot from Grandpa's swollen foot, and Grandpa grunted and groaned from the pain. I felt sorry for him, but there ain't nothing I could do but look on. Pa examined his foot and shaking his, he said, "Boy, that's a bad one. It's either broken or really badly sprained, but I gotta go for help." Grandpa said, "Now wait just a minute here. I'm not going to let you go out in no blizzard by yourself. What if something happens to you? Don't even know." "What time is it?" he asked. The judge looked at his watch. "It's almost 5 o'clock, he said. "Not long till daylight." "Then, if you want to go, you can see where you're going. Now help me get propped up against this bank," Grandpa said, "and I'll be all right. Don't hurt no more. It's just kind of numb." "He's right," the judge said. "Think you can stand it?" Papa asked. Grandpa roared like a bear. "Yeah, I can stand it. It's nothing but a sprained old ankle. I ain't gonna die. Build that fire up a little more, please." While Pa and the judge made Grandpa comfortable, I carried wood for the fire. "There's no use standing around gawking at me," Grandpa said. "I'm all right. Get that coon out of that tree. That's what we came for, ain't it?" Up until then, the coon hunting had practically been all but forgotten. The tree was about 30 feet from our fire, and we walked over and took a good look at it for the first time. My dog, seeing we was finally going to pay some attention to them, started bawling and running around that tree. Pa said, "It's not much of a tree, just an old box elder snag, and not even a limb on it." "I can't see no coon," said the judge. "Must be hollow." Papa beat on his side with the axe, and it gave forth a loud booming sound. He said, "It's hollow, all right." He stepped back a few steps and scraped his feet on the slick ground for a good footing and said, "Stand back. Hold them hounds, Billy. I'm going to cut it down. We need some wood for our fire anyways." Squatting down between my dogs, I held on to their collars. Papa notched that old snag so it would fall away from our fire, and the heavy axe chewed its way into that tree. It began to lean and kind of crack. Papa stopped chopping. He said to the judge, "Come on and help me now. I think we can push it." After much grunting and pushing, snapping and popping, it finally fell, and I turned my dogs loose. On hitting the ground, the snag split and broke wide open. Goggle-eyed, I stood rooted in my tracks and watched 3 huge coons come rolling out of that busted old trunk. One started up the washout, running between us and the fire. Old Dan caught him, and the fight was on. The second coon headed down the washout, and little Ann caught him. Hearing a loud yell from Grandpa, I looked that way, and old Dan and the coon was fighting close to his feet. He was yelling and beating at them with his hat. The judge and Papa ran to help. The third coon started climbing up the steep bank close to me. Just before reaching the top, his claws slipped in the icy mud. Tumbling end over end, down he came, and I grabbed up a stick and threw it at him. Growling and showing his teeth, he started for me. I threw the fight to him then and there. Some 10 yards away, I looked back. He was climbing the bank. That time he made it and disappeared into the thick cane. Hearing a squall of pain from little Ann, I turned. The coon was really working her over. He had climbed up on her back and was tearing and slashing at her. She couldn't shake him off, and grabbing a club from the ground, I ran to help her. Before we had killed our coon, old Dan came tearing in, and we stood and watched the fight. When the coon was dead, Papa picked it up, and we walked back to the fire. "How many coons were in that old snag?" Pa asked. "I saw 3, I said. "The one that got away climbed out over there." I pointed in the direction the coon had taken. Never should have pointed, because then my dogs turned as one and started bawling and clawing their way up that steep bank. I shouted and I scolded, but to no avail. They disappeared in the rattling cane. We stood still, listening to their voices. The sound died away in the roaring storm. Sitting down close to that fire, I buried my face in my arms and I cried. I heard the judge say to my pa, "This beats anything I ever done seen. Why, them dogs can read that boy's mind. He just pointed at that bank and away they went. Never saw nothing like it. I can't understand some of the things they've done tonight. Hounds usually aren't that smart. If they was collies or some other breed of dog, it'd be different. But they're just red-bone hounds, hunting dogs." Papa said, "Yeah, I know what you mean. I seen them do things that I couldn't ever understand. I'd never heard of hounds that ever had any affection for nobody, but these dogs is different. Do you know they won't hunt with anyone but him? Not even me?" Hearing my grandfather call my name, I went over and sat down by his side. Putting his arm around me, he said, "Now, I wouldn't worry about them dogs. They'll be all right. It's not long till daylight. Then you can go to 'em." I said, "Yeah, but what if the coon crosses that river, Grandpa? My dogs is going to follow him. They're going to get wet, and the cold could freeze to death." "Well, just have to wait and hope for the best," he said. "Now straighten up and quit that sniffling. Act like a coon hunter, son. You don't see me bawling now, do you? And this old foot is paining me something awful. I felt better after talking to my grandpa. Come on, let's skin these coons, Pa said. I got up to help him. After the kids was peeled from the carcasses, I had an idea. Holding one of them close to the fire until it was warm, I took it over and wrapped it around Grandpa's foot. Chuckling, he said, Boy, that feels good. Heat another skin the same way, please. I kept that up for the rest of the cold, lonely night. The next chapter, 18. Just before dawn, the storm blew itself out with one last angry roar, and it started a-snowing. A frozen silence settled over the canebrake. Back in the thick timber, the river bottoms, the sharp snapping frozen limbs could be heard. The tall stalks of wild cane looked exhausted from that night. They was drooping and bending from the weight of them frozen sleets. I climbed out of that deep gully and listened for my dogs, but I couldn't hear nothing. Just as I started back down that bank, I heard something, and I listened. Again, I heard that sound. Papa's watching me. Can you hear the dogs? He asked. No, not the dogs, I said, but I can hear something else. What's it sound like? He asked. Like someone whooping, I said. Papa and the judge hurried up that bank, and we heard the sound again. It was coming from a different direction. First time I heard it, I said it was way over that way. Oh, the judge said, it's the men from camp. They're searching for us. We started a whooping, and the searchers answered. Their voices came from all directions, and the first one to reach us was old Mr. Kyle. He looked haggard and tired, and he asked if everything was all right. Yeah, Papa said we're all right, but the old man has a bad ankle. Looks like we'll have to carry him out. Your team broke loose and came back to camp about midnight, Kyle said. This really spooked us. We were sure something had happened. 25 of us have been searching since then. Several men climbed down the bank and went over to Grandpa, and they looked at his ankle, and one said, Woo-wee, I don't think it's broken, but man, is that a bad sprain. You're in luck, another one said. We have one of the best doctors in the state of Texas in our camp, Dr. Charlie Latham. He'll have you fixed up in no time. Yeah, said another, and if I know Charlie, let's probably got a small hospital with him. Back in the crowd, I heard another man say, You mean that Latham fella? He owns them black and tan hounds? He's a doctor? Sure is, another one said, one of the best. Mr. Kyle asked where my dogs was, and I told them that they was treed somewhere. What do you mean, treed somewhere? He asked. Papa explained what had happened. With a wide-eyed look on his face, he said, Do you mean to tell me your hounds stayed with the tree in that blizzard? I nodded. Looking at me, he said, Son, I hope you have that coon treed, 'cause you need that one to win that cup. Those 2 Walker hounds caught 3 before the storm came up. When it got bad, all the hunters came in. The judge spoke up. I'll always believe that them hounds knew that boy needed another coon to win, he said. If you fellas had seen some of the things them dogs had done, you'd never believe it. One hunter walked over to that broken snag. 3 out of 1 tree, he said. No wonder, looky here. That old snag was half full of leaves and grass. Why, it's a regular old den tree. Several of the men walked over, and I heard one say, I seen this happen before. Remember that big hunt in the Red River bottoms when them 2 little beagle hounds treed 4 coons in that old hollow snag? They won that championship, too. I wasn't there, but I remember it, one said. Say, I don't see Benson, said Mr. Kyle. The men started looking at each other. He was searching further downriver than the rest of us, one fellow said. Maybe he didn't hear us a-shouting. Some of the men climbed out of the gully, and they started a-whooping. From a distance, we heard an answering shout. He hears us, someone said. He's a-comin'. Everyone looked relieved. Mr. Benson struck the washout a little way above us, and he was breathing hard as if he'd been running. He started to talk as soon as he was within hearing distance. It scared me when I first saw them, he said. I didn't know what they was. They looked like ghosts. Ghosts, I'm telling you. I never seen nothing like it. A hunter grabbed Mr. Benson by the shoulder and shaking him. Get a hold of yourself, man, he said. What you talking about? Mr. Benson took a deep breath to control himself and started again in a much calmer voice. Them hounds, he said. I found them hounds. They're frozen solid. They're nothing but white ice from the tips of them noses to the ends of their tails. Hearing Mr. Benson's words, I screamed and ran to my pa. Everything started whirling around and around. I felt light as a feather. My knees buckled, and I knew no more. And that's where we're going to stop, guys. Have a great day. I miss you all.